I was against socialism, I was against communism. But it took some exposure to economic ideas and living in free societies before I understood that what I was for was basically what we used to call classical liberalism. In other words, economic and political freedom. The difference between communism and socialism is that at the end of the day, it may not be as much of a clear line as some people think. Communists made a huge mistake by nationalizing the means of production. They nationalized factories and shops, etc. The state owned them, and because the state owned them, they became progressively much worse until eventually there was stagnation and communism collapsed. People live much longer lives than they used to. They are better educated. Well, let's go and talk about a few examples. So, throughout the history of our species, life expectancy was about 30 years. Today, globally, it is about 72 years. Liberal democracy and free market capitalism are imperfect. But we have to try and solve those imperfections. We have to try and reform the system so it is better. We should not try to get rid of the system, because when the system collapses, like it did in Venezuela, for example, the outcome is not necessarily something good. In fact, when big changes happen, when revolutions happen, there are very few revolutions that have ended in improving man's standard of living. The Glorious Revolution in England, the American Revolution. Other revolutions, Russian, Chinese, the Iranian Revolution, they all brought about catastrophes. More people,
yes.
More ideas,
Yes.
More ideas lead to more innovations. With more innovations, you have higher productivity, and higher productivity leads to higher standards of living.
Hola, soy Rodrigo Arenas. Te doy la bienvenida a Líderes, el podcast donde conversamos con las voces más influyentes en política y negocios, defendiendo siempre nuestros valores conservadores. Si quieres conocer de primera mano cómo piensan y qué inspira a los líderes de hoy, te invito a suscribirte al podcast. Apóyanos siguiéndonos en nuestras redes sociales y compartiendo nuestros episodios. Sé parte de la comunidad que construye un futuro mejor. Gracias por escucharnos en Líderes. Bienvenidos una vez más a su podcast Líderes con Rodrigo Arenas. Hoy tengo el honor y el gusto de conversar con una persona muy interesante, el señor Marian L. Tupy, y pues tendré el reto de volverlo a hacer en inglés. Ya será el segundo podcast que hago totalmente en inglés. El señor Marian Tupy es Senior Fellow del Cato Institute, el Centro para la Libertad Global y Prosperidad en Estados Unidos, researcher and commentator on globalization, development, and human well-being. He's founder and editor of humanprogress.org, a data-driven project documenting long-run improvements in living standards and countering declinist narratives. Co-author of Superabundance with Gail Pooley, and co-developer of the Simon Abundance Index. Focuses on population, innovation, and human flourishing. He's instructor in the Peterson Academy of Jordan Peterson. He teaches the economics of human flourishing. He's widely published and interviewed major newspapers, magazines, and broadcast media around the world. He's championing a rigorous, optimistic view of progress rooted in freedom and markets. Well, Marian, thank you very much. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you with us today. Marian promotes people, freedom, ideas, and innovation. That's what you promote. Rising living standards, more minds in freer societies. In freer societies, generate the knowledge that expands abundance faster than population. That's counterintuitive of what we've heard of how population and the excess of population is damaging the world. For you, abundance is best seen in prices, when measured by the work time needed to buy essentials. Many resources and goods become effectively cheaper over time as innovation compounds. Demography matters, Falling fertility threatens future innovation and prosperity. Policy and cultural choices that make family formation feasible and dignified are crucial. And that's mainly why we have you here. So, Marian, you were born in communist Czechoslovakia and later lived in Africa before settling in the West. Experiences that span very different systems and outcomes. You've mentioned that by age 10, you understood you lived in a strange place with no rights and where everything sucked. Everybody was poor, everything was gray. It was just a depressing place to grow up. I guess that's Czechoslovakia.
Correct.
How did growing up under a repressive, economically failed regime shape your perspective on humans, progress, and freedom?
Well, thanks. Great to be here. As you said, I was born under communism in Eastern Europe, in Czechoslovakia. Back then, Czechoslovakia was actually under a Soviet occupation. We actually had a Soviet army in opposition on our territory. And I guess that by the age of 10, partly because of the influence of my parents and my grandparents, who were not communists, I understood what I was against. I was against central planning. I was against a world without any political or economic rights, etc. But it took much longer to decide what I was for. It was easier to be against something. I was against socialism. I was against communism. But it took some exposure to economic ideas and living in free societies before I understood that what I was for was basically what we used to call classical liberalism. In other words, economic and political freedom. That term is no longer, or rather, it is confusing term to a lot of people. So people like me no longer call ourselves liberals, even though in Latin America we are still called liberals, or in Europe we are called liberals, but in the United States we call ourselves libertarians. And I guess the influence that it had on me is, of course, an understanding of how miserable life can be without economic and political freedom, when you cannot take a step in your society without a bureaucrat telling you where you should go, what you should do, what you should buy, etc. When the shops are empty, when you cannot leave the boundaries of your state because they're so afraid that you will never come back. All of these lessons I've internalized, and then I spent the last 25 years of my life devoted to the promotion of economic and political freedom at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C.
And Marian, people listen or hear the word communism, and they have no idea what they're talking about. Right now, amazingly, you have politicians in the United States saying that they're communist, or they are Marxist, or they are whatever socialist, which at the end, every socialist tends to finish as a communist. And people are voting for them.
Yes. Well, the first thing to understand is that after the fall of communism, we never really had the kind of reckoning that we had after the fall of Nazism and the destruction of the Third Reich. There was a lot of introspection. And to this day, you cannot be a part of a respectable society and call yourself a Nazi. Whatever you think about the Republican Party, for example, in the United States today, it still maintains a border between the extreme rightists. So recently there was a chap in the United States, and it emerged that on WhatsApp he was posting, "I have a Nazi streak in me." And I think he was earmarked for some position or another in the administration. And he had to withdraw his candidacy because it's clear that once you cross that invisible boundary and you call yourself a Nazi or you have Nazi sympathies, that you are beyond the scope of polite discussion. We never had that kind of reckoning in the West or even in the East with regard to communists. To this day, you can encounter American intellectuals, for example, or American academics who declare themselves to be communists or Marxists. And of course, to call yourself a socialist is perfectly normal. Now, the thing to understand, the difference between communism and socialism, is that at the end of the day, it may not be as much of a clear line as some people think, as you intimated in your opening remarks, and for the following reason. The communists made a huge mistake by nationalizing the means of production. They've nationalized factories and shops, etc. The state owned them, and because the state owned them, they became progressively much worse until eventually there was stagnation and communism collapsed. But you can get to a very similar position by simply increasing regulations. There comes a point at which having private property rights in something, let's say a factory or a shop, becomes meaningless because there are so many regulations as to what you can and cannot do, that even though the state doesn't own the shop or the company outright, it prevents you as a private entrepreneur from doing anything with your private property, with your company, or with your shop. And therefore, really the division between state ownership of the means of production and simply super regulatory state become meaningless.
Well, the property taxes is an example of that, right? It's you pay rent to the state every year by paying taxes of your property.
There are obviously dozens of taxes, but specifically what I'm talking about is the notion that you cannot hire and fire the people that you choose.
For example,
you cannot have people work for extra number of hours. The government regulates how many number of hours. The government regulates how many number of lunch breaks. The government regulates, how people should sit or at what sort of desks.
Yes.
The government regulates what you can buy and what you can sell. And once that becomes pervasive, then even though you are officially still a capitalist country, like the United States, the regulations basically turn it into a semi-socialist country. In fact, I wouldn't call the United States today a capitalist country. I think it's a mistake, both by libertarians to call the United States capitalist and both by socialists to insist that the United States is capitalist. It is not. It is a mixed economy where the government regulates.
Well, I would say, it's the country with more regulations almost in the world, with more rules. It's a country with a lot of rules.
Well, I wouldn't say more rules than anywhere else. I'm sure there are worse countries out there. But it is certainly a mixed economy.
It's a big, they have a lot of rules.
And the goal now is to, whatever one thinks about the Trump administration, there are good parts and there are bad parts. We can talk about that later. Certainly, things like undermining the checks and balances and so forth is on the bad side. On the good side is that there has been some movement toward deregulation, which we need massively in the United States.
Which would be awesome. We'll go back to that.
Yeah.
Let's go to what brought you to this event. You founded humanprogress.org to showcase empirical data on how much life has improved.
Correct.
Yet many people remain unaware of these gains. Evidence abounds of dramatic improvements, longer lifespans, higher incomes, better health and education, even in developing countries. However, there is often a wide gap between the reality of human experience, which is one of incremental progress, and public perception, which tends to be bleak and pessimistic about the present and future. Many in the media and academia push a declinist narrative that focuses on problems and paints humanity as on the brink of disaster, downplaying the enormous strides made. You have right now, for example, 20-year-old girls or boys saying, I don't want to bring more kids to this world because it's a horrible world. What motivated you to create humanprogress.org, and how does presenting hard data help combat this world is getting worse narrative?
Well, what motivated me is a knowledge, hopefully substantial knowledge of history, and especially of economic history. What we see around us, or what economic historians refer to as modernity, is really only the last 200 or 250 years of human existence. So we've been on this planet as Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years. And for virtually all of that time, our lives were much more miserable than any of us can possibly think about. Even in developing countries today, people live much longer lives than they used to. They're better educated. Well, let's go and talk about a few examples. So throughout the history of our species, life expectancy was about 30 years. Today, globally, it is about 72 years, 73 years. So each one of us today, as a result of modernity, has an extra life to lead. 50% of all children under the age of 15 died. Okay, so roughly every second kid died before they saw their 15th birthday. Today, those numbers are in...
That number, when would you put it in the time frame of humanity?
Well, since the beginning all the way to 1800s. Okay, so modernity starts in 1750 or 1800.
With the Industrial Revolution would be the...
Correct, I would say that, yes. Essentially, it doesn't matter where in the world you lived. Life expectancy was about 30 years, no matter where in the world you lived, whether it was in Bavaria or whether it was in Mexico. 50% of children died before the age of 15.
Or in New York.
Well, yeah. And what else? Calorie consumption. Today in the West, it's almost 3,500 calories to 4,000 calories per person per day, which is almost double of how much we should eat, which is why we have a problem with obesity. But it wasn't until 1820s that France, which was one of the most sophisticated countries in the world, reached 2,000 calories per day level. Okay. 2,000 calories per person per day is essentially what your country has to produce or purchase in order to ensure that nobody starves. If you have a supply of calories below 2,000, that means that some part of your population is being undernourished. It lives on the edge of starvation. And so we were hungry. We died young. We lived short lives. Only roughly 10% of the population could read and write. So again, massive improvements.
And inequality was huge.
Inequality was huge. People tend to think one of the most dispiriting parts of modernity is that we focus far too much on income inequality. And yes, income inequality is large today in the world, partly because we have a global economy, which means that if you have a globally relevant product, you can make hundreds of billions of dollars. Right? Before then, when markets were much more dispersed, when markets were much more restricted, when you couldn't sell to the whole world, there was also much less money to be made. But now you come up with an idea like this, an iPhone, and 8 billion people in the world want it. So of course you're going to make a lot more money. Nonetheless, people focus far too much on income inequality. But of course, there are other inequalities. When your lord or your slave owner could have literally a power over life and death over you. That was a type of inequality. When we didn't have equality before the law, say women as testimony before the court counted only half as much or 1/3 as much as males. That was also a kind of inequality.
That was really
Now, in all of these sorts of inequalities, the world has become much better. The life expectancy gap between the West and the rest shrunk. Lower inequality. The gap between how many children die in developing countries and developed world has shrunk. That's decreasing inequality. So actually we are living through the greatest reduction of inequality that we have seen since the huge gap opened during the Industrial Revolution between the West and the rest.
But even though the narrative is the contrary, even though
the narrative is the contrary,
the narrative is that like the world was better before capitalism, that the world was better before all this modernity that we're going through.
That's right, and part of the reason for that is obviously that people just don't know history. We teach far too little history, let alone economic history, and so people simply don't know how difficult life was in the past. More importantly, and this goes back to your previous question, more importantly, people do not understand what brought modernity about. They don't understand why everything that surrounds us, planes in the sky, cars in the street, MRI machines in the hospitals, kids, even in Guatemala, having computers and iPads, etc. What brought all that about? And two things have happened, essentially. Economic and political freedom dramatically increased in the world. I'm not talking necessarily about full-fledged democracy, but governments became much more responsible to the needs of the people. This happened in Britain. This happened in the United States, where the government became much less arbitrary, and there was basically much more freedom under the law and equality under the law. And so people felt much more free to basically pursue their lives and their hopes and their goals. And secondly, there was much more economic freedom. And so political liberty and economic liberty conspired to create modernity. And so my concern is not just that people don't understand history or don't read history, but that they don't understand what built the modern world. The sort of institutional and cultural underpinnings that are necessary for this to continue. So our friends in Venezuela are the kinds of people that will appreciate this more than anybody else. In 1952 and 1953, Venezuelan GDP per capita was higher than that in the United States. Venezuela was I'm not talking about income per capita, but GDP per capita, because it's skewed by oil, etc. GDP per capita was higher in Venezuela. And so Venezuela obviously had the kind of institutions, both political and economic. I'm not saying it was a perfect country, but it had political and economic institutions to produce a lot of wealth and create the most prosperous society in Latin America. Those institutions are now gone, and look what is happening in Venezuela. And so basically, my mission in life is to tell people we live in a deeply imperfect world. Liberal democracy and free market capitalism are imperfect. But we have to try and solve those imperfections. We have to try and reform the system so it is better. We should not try to get rid of the system, because when the system collapses, like it did in Venezuela, for example, the outcome is not necessarily something good. In fact, when big changes happen, when revolutions happen, there are very few revolutions that have ended in improving man's standard of living. The Glorious Revolution in England, the American Revolution. Other revolutions, Russian, Chinese, the Iranian Revolution, they all brought about catastrophe. So we have to be very careful about how we reform the system. We don't want to destroy it.
And I not only agree with you, but one of the things that, because you say people don't understand history or they don't read history, and I agree with you. But mostly I think the problem is not only that, but also we try to convince people with facts.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't convince people with facts. You convince people with stories, with the narrative. And if you ask me, I think that has been our biggest. And when I say our, I mean we the people that are on the side of the capitalists, the pro, let's say the pro individual liberty and the pro individual meritocracy. Because, for example, I was speaking with my mother a couple of months ago, and she said to me, "Oh, Rodrigo, I think I'm a little bit socialist." I'm like, "Wow, really? Why?" Because I really care about poor people. I'm like, "Mom, capitalists have taken more people out of poverty than any other system in the world." I didn't have the data exactly there, but it's millions of people, and we haven't really been able to tell that story, I think, in a successful way. In a way that people understand that capitalists care more about people and the progress of people than socialist or I think any other system. We haven't been able to tell that story. It's like capital. They and the left on the other side, they have been very successful in saying that capitalists only care about money, and we only care about money. And for example, if I would be a socialist, my argument on your freedom of hire, on your freedom of hours, but yes, because you want to exploit people, because you don't want to give them any rights, etc. And that I believe it's a I don't know if it's in English it's said like this, but it's una asignatura pendiente. We have a pending appending a signature, no, not signature. It will be a pending class on this. We have to do that. We have to be able to convince people that in a way that people understand it. It's not their responsibility to understand it like you understand it or like I understand it. Mm-hmm. It's our responsibility to tell the story to them in a way that they understand it. Because if not, we're gonna keep losing the battle.
I think there is a space for both. Obviously, it is very good to have data on your side rather than fighting against it.
Always backed by data.
Yeah, always backed by data. Yeah, I mean, the good thing is that if you read a newsletter from humanprogress.org, or if you look at our website, or you follow people like, I don't know, Johan Norberg or Bjorn Lomborg, the thing is that everybody's looking for us to mess up precisely because we are providing the counter narrative, right? We have to be very careful with our data. The far left doesn't have to be careful.
No, they say whatever.
Data. They say whatever comes to their minds. I think that capitalism has a lot of beautiful stories to tell. It can tell a story of China before 1978, when people were so poor. During the Great Leap Forward in the early 1960s, that people ate dirt. Literally, they were so hungry that they were eating dirt. After 1978, almost 1 billion Chinese was brought from absolute poverty to African standards of poverty to middle class standard of living. The Chinese now have a GDP per capita of roughly the Mexicans, so roughly $12,000-$13,000 per person.
Even though political and individual liberty there is still a pending subject.
Yes. But even though the Communist Party is in charge, even though it is a totalitarian communist system politically, what happened was in 1978, socialism gave way to a greater degree of capitalism. It was the abandonment of economic communism and allowing the Chinese people to follow their dreams and employ their God-given abilities that produced this Chinese economic miracle. It was a move from socialism to capitalism that produced it. Similar thing happened in India after the 1991 reforms, where before it was the Permit Raj. You couldn't do anything in the Indian economy. It was basically socialist. And India is now obviously a global economic power. The people are somewhat poorer than in China, but nonetheless, they're becoming rich fast. Why? Again, a step away from socialism to capitalism. We can talk about Hong Kong, the extraordinary story of Hong Kong, when after the Second World War, Hong Kong was just a fishing village. And today it is a gleaming first world standard capital of commerce. We could talk about other success stories. We could talk about Singapore, South Korea, Taiwan, Chile. What do they all have in common? They moved from socialism to capitalism. However imperfect, the stories are there to be told. We could also tell the stories from an individual perspective. A son of a Syrian immigrant who in the United States starts the Apple Corporation, Steve Jobs, and produces the products that we all admire. We can talk about a South African immigrant into the United States who started Tesla and SpaceX. Something like 40% of companies, major companies, innovative companies started in the United States in the last 20 or 30 years.
And I believe the United States is still like they say, the land of opportunity.
Yeah, it certainly is.
And from my point of view, I think I truly believe the most important, one of the most important traits a human beings need to have is the capability of dreaming, the capability of hoping that your future is going to be better than the present, and that future is going to be molded, is going to be built by yourself, by how do you work, how do you confront it, how your attitude towards the future. And that's one of the things that I truly believe that the United States are very successful. They attract people from everywhere in the world. I think it's the only country in the world that really attracts people from everywhere in the world that go to the country, that arrive in the country with nothing on one pocket in their pockets, and they can be the inventors of Apple or Tesla or SpaceX or whatever. It's amazing.
It's wonderful to see. Yes,
It's a wonderful, because at the end, everybody in the United States has hope.
yeah.
And at the end, that's how you want to live. You want to live with hope. You wanna think, you wanna believe that what you're doing today here, it's because it's gonna give you a better future tomorrow, and so on and so on.
But that is why it's so important.
Because if not, how do you live?
But that is why it's so important, especially for listeners of your podcast, to understand the importance of economic openness and economic freedom. Because what you don't want to do is what our European friends have done. So I'm European by birth, and whenever Europeans see something new, they're regulated to death. They have this idea of precautionary principle. Basically, in Europe, you cannot do anything until you prove that it is 100% safe. Right.
And I would add to that, because I want to get down to the superabundance thesis. That also adds is, I was speaking with some European people about a couple of months ago. They were from Spain, and this guy was telling me, I'm sending my kids abroad to they want to be entrepreneurs. I'm sending them either to the United States, either to America, or to the Middle East, to Abu Dhabi or to Dubai. And I told him why. And he said, because Europe is a museum.
That's right. Yeah.
It's beautiful. It has the Mediterranean. It's very beautiful, but people are not getting younger. The population is not growing. Even the energy, he told me, the energy is old. People are not innovating. And when you go to see how many innovative companies have been created in Europe in the last 20 years, I think the answer is none.
Right.
Something like that. So for that issue, you have the superabundance thesis. Population growth as something good.
Yes.
As a boon. For decades, conventional wisdom, and I don't know if it's conventional wisdom, the word, or traditional narrative or socialist narrative, has warned that more people mean fewer resources, that there's not enough water, that there's not enough land, echoing Malthusian's fears of overpopulation and scarcity. In contrast, superabundance makes the bold claim that population growth coupled with the freedom to innovate actually makes Earth's resources more abundant per person, essentially flipping the script on resource limits. You even developed the Simon Abundance Index to quantify this, finding that by 2023, the planet was 509% more abundant in resources than in 1980, despite rapid population growth. How did you arrive at this counterintuitive conclusion that more people and more freedom led to greater resource abundance? And how do you explain this optimistic outlook to those who still fear that growing a population will inevitably deplete our planet's resources?
So I wish I could take credit for finding that more people leads to greater abundance, but I'm walking in the footsteps of a giant economist called Julian Simon, who was actually my predecessor at the Cato Institute as a senior fellow in the 1990s. Unfortunately, he died far too young in, I believe, 1998 or so. But other famous economists, including Nobel Prize winners like Kramer and Lucas and even Roma, have come to the same conclusion. So the logic goes like this. The more people you have, the more ideas you have. More ideas lead to new inventions and innovations. New innovations and inventions lead to productivity gains, and productivity gains then lead to higher standards of living. So let's take...
Please repeat that.
Okay, so more people.
Yes.
More ideas.
Yes.
More ideas lead to more innovations. With more innovations, you have higher productivity. And higher productivity leads to higher standards of living.
Would you add discomfort around somewhere there? Like there's more people force you to be more creative because
of competition?
of competition, or because, okay, yes, we need more food, so we need to be planting food in the walls.
Possibly,
that kind
yes,
of
yes. In
discomfort?
a way, in kind of.
Because I truly believe
Yeah.
human beings are amazingly adaptable.
Yes, quite possibly. You see, so discomfort could be seen. The perfect analogy is rising prices. Let's say that you add China to the global economy, which is what happened, and in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, and China is now growing at double-digit rates, and consequently, you have more need for natural resources, for raw materials. And so the price of copper goes up. That's the discomfort, right? Suddenly you have prices going up and you say, oh my God, what am I going to do? Well, let's look for a way to use less copper, to recycle copper, or to look for new deposits of copper, or to look for substitutes for copper. Okay, so the increasing price of a commodity is essentially the discomfort that you can then use to get around the problem. So what would be a perfect example of an innovation? Let's say that America is producing a lot of oil, but because of our outdated drilling technology, we have reached the limits of what we can drill. Okay, there is still a lot of oil underneath, but it's uneconomical. With the usual drilling technology, maybe it costs you $50 to get a barrel of oil from the ground, but it costs you $55 to drill for it, so you're just not going to bother, right? So
instead of the $8 that would cost you in
the Middle East. I'm making up these numbers, right? Now, suddenly, you have a genius who comes along and says, you know what we could do? We could frack. Instead of drilling, we are going to produce a new technology.
But for that genius had to be born.
For that genius had to be born, and he presumably had to cooperate with other people and so forth, and they had to get access to some maybe capital, and they had to be able to purchase land that was protected by a legal framework, so rule of law, equality under the law, access to capital, all of those play a role. But ultimately it comes down to an idea. You can have equality before the law, you can have capital, but if there are no new ideas to invest in, then it's pretty useless. So you have to have a new person who is born on this planet and who suddenly gets an idea. Hey, how about we frack? And so we can go to those fields, oil fields that we were there before, and they're uneconomical through normal drilling, but through fracking, we can still get a lot of oil out, and we can get gas out. And before you know it, the United States is the largest gas and oil producer in the world. Another example of human ingenuity. When we would bring in the harvest for hundreds of thousands of years, at certain points in the year, men would and women would be equipped with scythes and sickles, and they would go there and back-breaking work. When I was a kid in Czechoslovakia, it was still a very poor country, and you could still go into the fields and see people with scythes and with sickles, cutting down the harvest, cutting down the grains, let's say wheat. Today, you have a man.
You still see that in Latin America.
You can still see it in Latin America, hopefully not for long, right? This is what we want to get away from it. What we want to see in 20 or years' time, hopefully sooner, is one Guatemalan sitting in an air-conditioned combine harvester that has a satellite link to tell him exactly where he should go, and he has a GPS and sensors everywhere, and he can do the job of 1,000 Guatemalan peasants or field hands. And what happens as a result of that is two things. One is that the income of the Guatemalan driver of a combine harvester is going to increase, right? He's doing the work of 1,000 others, so he's going to become much more expensive. His income is going to grow. But because he can now produce much more wheat, or whatever is grown in Guatemala, I don't know, the price of that commodity is going to come down. So his income goes up, the price of a commodity comes down because there is more of it, right? And that's essentially the time price. Time price tells you how long you have to work in order to buy something. And if you are becoming richer, if your income is increasing, And instead of having to work 2 hours a day to buy your food, only an hour to buy your food, maybe to 10 minutes to buy your food, that's the time price. We are evaluating everything and how long does it take you to, because if instead of 2 hours to do your work to buy food, you only have to spend 10 minutes to buy food, then you have 1.5 hours to do something else, maybe to save enough money for a bicycle or a motorbike, or send your child to school, or
to invent something.
Or to invent something.
And when I was talking about discomfort, for example, is when you see, for example, in the United States, you had the Rockefellers, you had the Vanderbilts, you have these traditional industrious families that from my point of view, so how I see it is when population grows. So I don't know. I'm gonna invent these numbers, but let's say the United States had 100 million population 120 years ago.
Well, I could tell you the exact number. So at the time of independence, there were 3 million Americans.
3 million.
There are 350 million Americans, and our standards of living are much higher. So clearly, more people means higher standards of living.
Definitely. Yeah. But what I'm trying is how many people did the United States had in the early 1900s?
I can't tell you.
Let's say 100 million.
Yeah.
Let's say 100 million. So you had these industrial families that were very successful. They made a lot of money, but they were comfortable about it. So if you see the Rockefeller, they didn't invent anything after petroleum, after oil.
Mm-hmm.
The Vanderbilt didn't invent anything after railroads. The Ford family didn't invent anything after the cars, because they get comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if people keep being born and the population keeps growing and demanding things, then you have a guy with a last name Musk that goes and he's uncomfortable because he's not millionaire yet, so he wants to make money.
Yeah.
And he has to see what an added value he can create. What problem can he solve?
Yeah.
So he can make money. So that's what I was saying about discomfort. It's the discomfort of people that didn't like more, let's say, the black humo, the black of their cars, the burning of oil. So they wanted something cleaner. And this guy that is saying, okay, and I have 100 million because Ford, GMC, etc., they stopped inventing.
Yes.
Because they were comfortable.
Yes.
And that's what I believe, that the growing of population makes you uncomfortable, like on both ways of the aisle. And that where innovation comes.
I think that's true. I think that's true. But an analogous situation to it would be a global economy, right?
Yes.
So open trade is very important. So if American companies have a captive market, then the Ford doesn't have to invent anything, right?
Exactly.
They have a captive market.
Because if you really have, I don't need to invent more because I already make all the cars that are being bought per year, so I don't even more.
So what you need is domestic disruptors. Musk is obviously making his Teslas in America and taking some share from Ford or GM or whatever else. But you also want international,
But also the market grew a lot.
Yes, and the market grew.
The market grew hugely for the one the market that Henry Ford approached in 1920s, 2030s. It's a lot smaller than the one. So you could Ford can still make money. And then there's enough market for Tesla, for example. Marian, ever since Thomas Malthus in 1798, pessimists have predicted that population growth would outstrip food and resources, with dire outcomes. Well, you see all the things about the synthetic meat and everything now. Paul Ehrlich's 1968 book, The Population Bomb, famously warned hundreds of millions would starve by the 1970s and 80s. Of course, he was wrong. And in reality, those decades saw declining hunger and falling resource prices, exemplified by Julian Simon's bet, the one that you said, that commodity prices would drop as humans innovated, which Ehrlich lost when the selected metals became 36% cheaper by 1990, All 50 commodities tracked by your Simon Abundance Index also grew more abundant as population rose. Why do you think the Malthusian worldview persists despite such repeated failures and evidence to the contrary? And what lessons should policymakers and the public draw from the fact that human ingenuity has consistently outpaced these gloomy predictions of scarcity?
I think that given how pervasive this myth is, we have to look to human evolution, to human nature, to find out why is it that we believe in something that is demonstrably false. The world had 1 billion people in 1800. Now it has 8 billion people. We are obviously much richer than what we were in 1800. So it's clear that Malthusianism is not true. Why do people believe it? I think that we have evolved to be zero-sum thinkers. You can totally see how in, say, our hunter-gathering ancestral homeland or ancestral time, let's say you have a tribe of 100 people, and the hunters come back with a killed giraffe or an elephant or something like that, which has to be evenly distributed amongst the tribe, because if you don't, somebody's going to go hungry and die, right?
And there's no more.
So there's no more. So in a literal kind of way, in the old days, if you had double the portion of something, somebody else had to go hungry. We developed to be zero-sum thinkers. An analogous situation to it would be, let's say that you and 3 other people, let's say 4 of us, go to dinner, and we have, let's say 6 people. We go to dinner and there is a pizza, and it has 6 slices. Well, if you have 2 slices, somebody has to go without it. Now the beauty of so that's our thinking. That's how the life was. That's really how life was. It was incredibly difficult. There was constant food shortages, and so you had to be you were not just a zero-sum thinker, you were also an egalitarian, right? Everybody had to get their piece, otherwise the society would break down. Now, the beauty of living in a modern world under capitalism and under liberal democracy is that first of all, we can buy more pizzas. But even if we didn't, think about it as a dinner party where people bring food with them. So yes, maybe there's a pizza to start with, but maybe a guy will bring a salad. Maybe somebody else will bring a dessert. Maybe somebody else will bring macaroni and cheese. And before you know it, you have a feast. So the way to think about population growth is that, yes, every person comes into the world with an empty stomach, but also with a brain capable of coming up with new ideas about how to grow the pie. Okay, and that's something that we need to that people have to understand, is that it's not just the empty stomach; it's also a brain capable of innovation.
Wow, yeah, and it's not only totally true, but also. And that's maybe where I want to take you with the narrative. It's how do we tell that because as I've heard it not once but 100 times. I have a 22-year-old daughter, and I've heard it like from, let's say, from the generation 100 times, that this is a world that everything is it's scarce, like that they don't want to have more kids because there's not gonna be food for them, or gardens or parks or nature. I saw a video, and I don't know if it's true, but that if you take like the 8 billion people that we are right now in the world, you can feed them like in Argentina. Is that true?
You can fit them in Texas or in Argentina or any tiny place,
but
depending
like
on
one place. The rest of the world would be totally by itself.
If you had a Hong Kong density of global population, it would probably be not much larger than, I don't know, the state of Illinois or the state of Maryland. It would be a tiny piece of land. Now, we don't necessarily all want to live like the people in Hong Kong, which are a lot of. Although Hong Kong prices are the highest prices in the world precisely because people want to live there. So clearly people don't mind density as much as other people think. Nonetheless, the fact is that there are very few people in the world. Once you increase density, you can put them in a small patch of land.
But that's very important because that's like a clear way to tell people, if you can fit everybody in Illinois, you still have the rest of the world to keep it green and the rivers and
Certainly.
and grow food, etc.
Certainly, the biggest friend of the environment is urbanization. Already something like 50% of all people in the world live in cities. We want to get that to a higher percentage. I say we want to. I don't want to I don't want to force people into anything.
No, but you want to create the incentives to do that.
Yeah, but I don't even need to, because people generally gravitate towards cities anyway. Young people want to live in cities. That's where the fun is. That's where other young people are. That's where they can go to movies and they can date. They can have fancy restaurants.
You can make more money.
Yeah, and where you can make more money, certainly. My colleague Chelsea Follett has a book, Centers of Progress, and it's cities. Cities have always driven progress forward. But why is urbanization so important for the environment? Is because the biggest disruptor of land and animals is always the human being and the farm. If we can I would answer your daughter in two ways. One, get productivity of agriculture as high as possible. We want to produce more and more bushels of wheat or corn per acre of land so that we can use less land but more efficiently to feed the population. And therefore, the land that you don't use, because you are so efficient in your agriculture, you can return back to animals. Second, you take the human out of nature, you put him in a city. Not everybody wants to do that. There are some people who will always want to live in nature. Good for them. But by 2100, 80% of people in the world will be living in cities, maybe more. And so that means that the rest of the planet is left to animals and left to animals and to nature. And nature will rebound. We know that nature will rebound. Anybody who has a house.
Well, that's the only good thing about the pandemic.
Yes,
that we saw how nature rebounded.
Rebound. I mean, there were unexpected fish and wildlife swimming in Venice and whatever else. People now swim in Seine. There are freshwater dolphins in Thames, in London. What happened was that as societies grow rich, they start investing much more in the environment clears up. But the key is that nature can rebound very, very quickly. As any house owner will tell you, if they leave the house for a couple of years, they come back, nature is everywhere, right? So I'm very optimistic about the future of nature, provided that we can become more agriculturally efficient and we can become more urbanized.
And to finish, Marian, what would you say are some encouraging or the most encouraging signs that prosperity and environmental stewardship can go, and I believe are going, hand in hand?
Well, let's see. We have reached post-peak land, meaning the amount of agricultural land used on the planet. Our population, by the way, continues to increase. It will increase for another 30 or 40 years, and then it will start decreasing. So the population of the world will probably peak around 8.5 to 9, about 9 billion people, and then it will start declining because people don't have as many babies as they should. Anyway, the point is that in spite of the growing global population, we have reached peak agricultural land. The amount of land used for agriculture, cattle, as well as wheat and corn, etc., has actually started decreasing. So the good news is that we are already there. The ozone layer has been virtually regenerated. Whale populations are increasing around the world. The population of previously endangered species in Europe is coming back. There is more reforestation in China, Europe, in North America than before. We stopped. We still have a problem in Brazil. Globally, the forest coverage is decreasing at a very slight rate, but in the richest parts of the world, forest is making a comeback. Soon we'll be able to bring back animals that have died, who have been extinguished. So long as we can get access to DNA, we'll be able to maybe reconstitute some of the animals that are no longer with us, such as the dodo or the mammoth and whatever else. So, in my view, right now, there really is no reason why any animal that we care about should still go extinct. We have the money, we have the resources, we have the drive to do that. But I want to emphasize that the best friend of good environment, of environmental quality, is a rich country. If you look at the countries which have the highest environmental quality in the world, they are the richest places in the world.
And the richest country in the world are usually the ones with most population.
They are highly populated countries, although China and India obviously being the most populous.
But they're becoming richer because of their population.
They're becoming richer.
Everybody wants their market.
They're becoming richer, and
the U.S. has been always a big population country.
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't want to make an absolute comment like that, because I don't know, for example, what the like the density of the Swiss population is. But what I can tell you, what I can tell you is that places like Chad and Central African Republic, which have very few people, they are also the poorest in the world.
But what I tried to say was, yes, I agree with you that Liechtenstein is extremely wealthy.
Yes.
But what has been invented in Liechtenstein?
Right.
What solution has?
You certainly need people for innovation.
So
yes.
What I'm trying to say is the mix of high population, innovation,
absolutely crucial.
Creation of wealth.
Yes.
Creation of wealth from scratch, because you have the wealth in Switzerland or Liechtenstein or even Denmark.
Yes.
But that's a wealth that it's 100 years, or even it's a wealth that is being imported. But wealth that's created from scratch, like Steve Jobs' wealth,
yes,
or Elon Musk, or even Henry Ford 100 years ago, it's usually from places where you have high population.
Agreed.
And you have that type of innovation.
Agreed.
So that's what I meant. Not about the GDP per capita,
yes,
but more about the wealthy countries, the countries,
innovation is crucial,
and the countries where people want to make business.
Yes.
So okay, I want to keep my money maybe in Switzerland or Liechtenstein, but I don't want to make money in Liechtenstein. Nobody's like, oh, I'm going to open a new business for the Liechtenstein market.
Right. Yeah.
So Marian, well, thank you very much. It's very exciting to listen to, because it's a different theory, but it's not only a theory. It's you have the data. So
we have the data to prove
the data supports this, and it's very important. And I really urge you. I really commend you to. We have to be very creative on how to tell these stories, because the left, the socialists, they are winning that part. They have Netflix, they have HBO, they have Hollywood, they have all these stories, all the movies. Remember, all the movies that we've seen in the last 20 or 30 years about the future.
It's always catastrophic.
Always catastrophic. The desert, these horrible places with, a lot of airplanes but not a place where we want to live. And I truly believe it's totally different. When you go, for example, right now to Colorado in the United States, or even to Costa Rica, which is a lot more wealthier, or to this, nature is a great friend of wealthy, successful countries.
I agree.
So I think it's very important to be more aggressive on the narrative, on the storytelling of how to tell the stories. But congratulations, thank you very much, and this is definitely not the last podcast that we'll be having, because there's too much information that
I'm happy to come back.
We need to keep approaching.
Happy to come.
Thank you, Marian.
Thank you very much.
Bueno, y hoy nos acompañó Marian Tupy, pues una persona con un conocimiento espectacular de un tema sumamente no controversial, manipulado, que tenemos que entender mejor, porque definitivamente los humanos, la población, somos positivos y somos altamente adaptables, pero además de ingeniosos. Por lo que, bueno, muchísimas gracias por habernos acompañado el día de hoy y nos vemos en el próximo podcast el próximo jueves. Muchas gracias.